It started one night when I couldn't sleep. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the dark with my eyes, when I heard the faint creak of the fridge door echo through the quiet house. It was past midnight, maybe closer to 2, and that sound should have meant nothing. But somehow, I knew it did. That was the beginning. I'd been married for 12 years, not unhappily, but not happily either. Just existing in that middle space people don't like to talk about. The part where routine replaces affection and words become functional rather than emotional. My husband wasn't cruel. He wasn't even inattentive, really. He just wasn't present, not in the way I needed. His mind always seemed to be elsewhere in meetings, emails, financial goals, and business dinners I never attended anymore. The days were predictable. I'd wake early, make breakfast that he often skipped, clean, run errands, and by evening, I'd cook again, serve plates for 2, and most nights, end up scraping his untouched food into the trash when he texted that he'd be late. And then came the summer my nephew moved in. He wasn't really my nephew, not by blood. He was my husband's sister's son, 22, taking a break before grad school. He needed a place to stay while he sorted things out, and we had the space. My husband said yes without asking me, as usual, but I didn't mind. David was quiet, polite. He didn't take up much room. He offered to help with groceries, cleared his dishes without being asked, and always knocked before entering any room. He had this calm way about him, watchful, present, the kind of presence you don't notice at first until you feel it when it's gone. It was in the little things, the way he actually listened when I spoke, the way his eyes didn't glance past me the way my husband's did. I caught him watching me sometimes, not in a leering way, just noticing me. And it was strange how that stirred something inside me, something I thought had dried up years ago. It started subtly. One night, I couldn't sleep. Again, I crept down the hallway barefoot, planning to pour myself some water and maybe sit with a book. But when I stepped into the kitchen, the dim light above the stove was already on. And he was there, standing in front of the open fridge, shirtless, a glass in hand. His head turned slightly when he heard me, and he smiled softly, not startled, just as if he'd been expecting someone. Couldn't sleep either? He asked, his voice a soft murmur that barely disrupted the quiet. I nodded. Seems like a trend lately. He closed the fridge, grabbed a second glass, and filled it, held it out to me. Our fingers brushed, just for a moment, but my skin remembered it far longer. We didn't say much else that night, just sat at the small breakfast table, sipping quietly, occasionally glancing at one another. There was no flirting, no inappropriate touch, but something hung in the air, something that neither of us acknowledged, but neither of us tried to break. After that, it became routine, not planned, not spoken of, but understood. Every few nights, I'd wake up, heart restless, and find him there. Or he'd arrive moments after I did, as if drawn by some silent signal we both heard. We'd sit, sip tea, talk softly, nothing scandalous, nothing wrong, but the wrongness was there anyway. Beneath every glance, every pause, every silence, I started to notice him more during the day. How he'd linger in doorways, listening to music with one earbud in. The way he smelled faintly of citrus and laundry soap when he passed me in the hallway. I began to wear my robe a little looser in the mornings, a little more lip balm before coming downstairs. Subtle things, nothing obvious. Still, guilt began to whisper, not because anything had happened, but because something hadn't. And yet I wanted it to. I started imagining moments that hadn't occurred, his hand brushing my hip accidentally, his voice saying my name in a different tone. I'd lie in bed, wondering what his mouth would feel like against mine. Then I'd chastise myself for even thinking it. One afternoon, I found myself staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror longer than usual. Not judging, just looking, trying to see what he might see. I wasn't young anymore, but I wasn't gone either. There were lines on my face that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But there was softness too, depth. I wasn't the same girl I was at 25, but maybe I wasn't invisible yet either. And then one night, the night that changed everything, it wasn't tea he was making in the kitchen. It was toast. At nearly 30 a.m., the scent of warm bread and butter filled the house. I patted in quietly, unsure if I should interrupt. He turned, saw me, and smiled. There was no surprise in his eyes, no guilt, just warmth, like I belonged there. Couldn't sleep again? He asked. I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself. The night air felt colder than usual. "Want some?" he offered, breaking the slice in two, handing me half. I took it, fingers brushing again. This time, I didn't pull away quickly. Neither did he. We stood there in the hush of the kitchen, chewing quietly, side by side. And then, without thinking, I said, "It's strange how silence can feel so loud." He looked at me for a long time, not just at my face, but into it, as if he were searching for something beneath my skin. "I know," he said finally. "I hear it all the time." I turned to set my plate down, and for a moment, I felt him behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I felt the heat from his chest against my back. I closed my eyes. The air between us practically vibrated, but nothing happened. I walked past him, brushed his arm with mine. I could have stepped further away. I didn't. I lingered, just long enough for him to notice, just long enough for him to feel it. And as I left the room, I didn't look back, but I felt his eyes on me. My heart beat louder that night than it had in years, not because I was in love, not because I wanted an affair, but because for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt wanted, desired, not for what I did or what role I played, wife, cook, homemaker, but for who I was, beneath all of it. That night I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, the ceiling blank above me, a slice of toast warmth still lingering on my lips. And the image of his eyes, soft, waiting, unreadable, burned somewhere deep in my chest. Something had begun, and though nothing had happened yet, we both knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The next few days passed in an odd kind of silence, not from lack of sound but from the weight of everything unsaid. We didn't mention the kitchen, or the toast, or the way I lingered when I passed him, but something between us had shifted. There was a new rhythm, quiet but undeniable. We didn't look at each other the same way. He avoided eye contact during the day, spoke less at breakfast, kept his headphones in a little longer than usual, and I became painfully aware of every inch of the house, of where he was, of when he moved from room to room, of how often our paths almost crossed. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to avoid him or collide. By the third night, I gave in again. I told myself I was just thirsty, that the fridge was where the water was, and that was all. But deep down, I already knew what I was hoping for. And there he was, again, leaning against the counter, arms folded, head tilted just slightly when he saw me enter. Like I'd walked into a scene we both recognized too well. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, the faintest ghost of a smile on his lips. "Still trending," I replied, forcing a breathy laugh that didn't quite cover the tension. He poured me a cup of tea. No words exchanged, just the quiet clink of the spoon, the steam rising between us. Our hands met again as he passed it over. Again too long. Again, not by accident. He pulled out a chair. I sat, across from him, too close. For a while, we said nothing. Just sat there, breathing in sync, as though speaking would break something fragile. I wasn't sure when I started talking, but the words came soft, careful, like they had been waiting inside me for years. "I used to think love would feel like fireworks," I whispered. "But now I wonder if it's just quiet. Someone remembering how you take your tea. Someone listening." He didn't interrupt. Didn't try to fill the silence with comfort or advice. He just watched me, like he was memorizing the way the light touched my face. "You deserve to feel wanted," he said at last. 4 words, that was all, but they hit me like thunder. My breath caught. I looked away, blinking hard. Those words shouldn't have been said, not by him, not to me, but there they were between us, pulsing like a heartbeat. I finished my tea quickly and left. Didn't look back, didn't say goodnight, but I didn't sleep either. Instead, I lay awake, the words echoing over and over. "You deserve to feel wanted." The next morning, I avoided him, took my breakfast later than usual, stayed in my room until noon, pretended to be on the phone when I passed him in the hall. But by that night, I was back in the kitchen. He was already there. Of course he was. Neither of us pretended anymore. He didn't make tea this time, just stood there, barefoot, leaning against the sink, watching me walk in like I belonged to the moment. I stopped in the doorway. For a long time, neither of us said a thing. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the distant ticking of the wall clock. Then he took a step forward. Slow, careful, almost reverent. He was close now, Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. Close enough that his breath stirred the hair near my temple. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Still, I didn't move. Not when his hand reached out, hovering near mine. Not when our fingers brushed, then linked. Not when his forehead leaned in toward mine, stopping just a breath away. And then it happened. I kissed him first. It wasn't wild. It wasn't urgent. It was soft, exploratory, like pressing a fingertip against a bruise, unsure how deep it goes. He kissed me back slowly, almost cautiously, like he didn't want to break the moment, like he was waiting for me to pull away, to change my mind. But I didn't. I let myself get lost in the warmth, in the quiet, in the rush of something long denied. It didn't last long, maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. Time felt irrelevant. When we finally parted, we both stood there breathless. His eyes searched mine, asking questions I couldn't answer. I turned away first, not out of shame but because if I didn't, I might do it again. He didn't stop me. He didn't follow. I went upstairs and closed the door behind me with shaking hands, pressed my back to the wood, touched my lips like they weren't mine. I should have felt guilt. Maybe I did, but mostly I felt alive. The next day, we didn't speak. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers. I heard him leave early, keys jingling in the front door. I made myself coffee and stared out the window for over an hour, unable to focus on anything. And that night, I didn't go downstairs, but I didn't sleep either. I tossed and turned, the memory of his mouth on mine haunting every moment. My body remembered the way he looked at me, the way his hands almost touched my waist, the way it felt to be chosen just for a moment. I kept hearing his voice, soft and certain. You deserve to feel wanted. That voice rang louder than anything my husband had said in weeks. A few nights later, I woke again, not from thirst, not from restlessness, but from need. I slipped into the hallway, barefoot, heart already racing. As I approached the kitchen, I paused in the dark. He wasn't there. The light was off. The silence was still. And for the first time, the kitchen felt empty. I stood there a while, unsure whether to wait or go back to bed. Part of me felt relieved. Another part ashamed to admit it felt disappointed. But then, footsteps, soft, measured, behind me. I turned just as he stepped into the doorway, surprised to see me. We stared at each other. There were no smiles this time, no questions, no casual conversation to hide behind. I stepped forward. He didn't move. I touched his arm just once, lightly, but it was enough to set everything else in motion. He leaned in again, slower this time, as if asking permission without words. And again, I kissed him. This one was different, deeper, less hesitant, but still quiet, still careful. It didn't go further. He pulled back, eyes dark, breathing hard. I stepped away, shook my head gently. He understood. Somewhere in both of us, a line had been crossed, but another still remained, and we both felt the edge of it, trembling underfoot. We stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. Then he whispered, "We can't keep doing this." I nodded. I know. But neither of us moved. Eventually, I turned first, left the kitchen without another word. As I climbed the stairs, I didn't look back, but my whole body ached too. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't cry. I just lay awake in the dark, reliving the way his lips felt, the way he looked at me, the way everything we'd never said finally took shape in that quiet kitchen. Not in chaos, not in passion, but in the soft, forbidden hush between two people who should have never seen each other like that. And yet we had. And nothing would Beth a seam. The days after that were heavier than I expected. Not because anyone said anything. No one knew. Nothing changed on the surface. But beneath it all inside I was different. Something had shifted. Something I couldn't put back. David stayed out longer. I noticed. He returned late. Sometimes after I was already in bed. The easy rhythm we'd fallen into disappeared. There were no more late-night teas, no casual glances across the kitchen, just space, intentional space. And in that space, silence bloomed. My husband came back that weekend. He'd been away for nearly a week on business. When he walked through the door, suitcase in hand and phone already at his ear, he kissed my cheek out of habit. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean in either. It was mechanical, like setting the table or folding laundry. A gesture with no temperature. We had dinner that night, all three of us. The table felt smaller, the air tighter. David was polite, quiet. His fork never scraped the plate. His eyes never lifted above his food. My husband talked about a new contract, a difficult client. I nodded at all the right times, smiled when expected, but I tasted none of what I ate. When the dishes were done and everyone retreated into separate rooms, I stood in the kitchen alone, hands pressed to the counter, wondering what line I had crossed that I couldn't uncross. I didn't cry, not then, but later, in bed, with my husband asleep beside me and the room wrapped in shadow, the tears came slowly, silently, not out of regret, not exactly, more out of the weight of knowing that even if nothing more ever happened, I had already betrayed something sacred. And yet, I wasn't sorry, not fully, because for a brief, stolen moment, I had remembered what it was to feel alive. Days passed. David and I didn't speak of it, not once. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers in a house too quiet to ignore. He'd glance at me sometimes, quickly, almost apologetically, and I'd look away, afraid that one more second of eye contact would unravel everything again. He started packing a few days earlier than planned. Said his friend had offered him a place in the city, closer to his university, easier commute. I nodded when he told me, said it made sense, even smiled, like I was happy for him. But later, I found myself standing outside his room, staring at the half-closed door, hearing the soft sound of a zipper being drawn. I didn't go in. That night, his last night in the house, I woke up at 2 o'clock again, out of habit, or maybe hope. I walked to the kitchen on autopilot, half expecting the light to already be on, half dreading it. It wasn't. The room was dark, still, undisturbed. I stepped inside anyway, leaned against the counter, pressed my palms to the cool surface and let the silence settle over me like a blanket. Then soft footsteps behind me. He didn't speak, neither did I. He moved beside me slowly, as though walking through fog. We stood there together, not facing each other, not touching, just breathing in the same quiet space. "I'm sorry," he whispered eventually, his voice low, thick. I shook my head. "Don't be." A pause. Then, "It shouldn't have happened." I nodded. But it did. We turned to each other finally. His eyes were tired. So were mine. I wasn't trying to. He began, but trailed off. I understood what he meant. He wasn't trying to seduce me, or take advantage. It wasn't planned. It wasn't anything except what it was. "I know," I said softly. He looked down. His hands clenched once, then relaxed. "I think about it," he said, "more than I should." "Me too." Another pause. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the first kiss. The way it hadn't been about passion or rebellion, but about hunger, the quiet kind. The one that builds over years. The one that isn't fed by touch, but by absence. "No," I said honestly, "but I can't let it happen again." He nodded. "I wouldn't want to make things harder for you." I smiled, sad and genuine. "You already did." We both laughed, then soft, tired laughter that held no joy, only release. Then he stepped closer, just enough. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached out and pulled me into an embrace. Not lustful, not desperate, just long, quiet, warm. I let myself stay there for a few seconds longer than I should have. His hand was at the small of my back. Mine rested against his shoulder. We didn't move. We just held. And then I stepped away. He didn't stop me. That was the end of it. The next morning, he was gone before I came downstairs. His room was clean, bed made, key left neatly on the counter. No note, no message, just silence. My husband drank his coffee and complained about the traffic. I nodded, pretending to listen. I smiled when he mentioned a weekend trip, said it might be good for us to get away. I agreed, even though I knew nothing was far enough. The house returned to normal. Dinners resumed. Laundry was folded. Groceries were bought. Everything functioned the way it always had. But I didn't. Not really. I went through the motions. I laughed when I was supposed to. I answered messages from friends. I even complimented my husband's new haircut. But a part of me remained in that kitchen. A part of me still felt his breath on my neck, his voice in the dark. That question I never answered out loud. "Do you regret it?" I didn't. Not in the way I was supposed to. Because for once, I hadn't disappeared. For once, Someone had seen me, not the wife, not the homemaker, not the shadow of a woman who once wanted more, but me. And that feeling, that memory, it stayed, even after the guilt faded, even after the shame receded, even after the silence between me and David became permanent. It stayed. Weeks passed, then months. I never heard from him again. Sometimes I wondered if he thought about me, if he ever remembered those nights, the stolen glances, the way the kitchen felt like another world entirely. Sometimes I hoped he didn't, but most nights, when I stood in that same kitchen, in the same pale light, I'd hear echoes of his voice. I'd feel the ghost of that kiss. That moment we both knew we'd gone too far and not far enough. Infidelity doesn't always come with loud explosions or broken vows. Sometimes it slips in like steam through a crack in the door. Sometimes it comes in the form of a look, a touch, a kiss you weren't supposed to give but couldn't stop. And sometimes it lingers in the space between two people who almost but not quite became something more. He was my nephew by marriage. He was young, temporary, just passing through. But somehow, he reminded me of who I had once been. And for a brief, irreversible moment, I reached for that version of myself. I don't know what that makes me, but I know this. Some betrayals don't live in actions. They live in memories you can't forget. And he became Nephew.